What's up guys, I'm Brent Hall. Welcome to another Tutorial Tuesday. Today I'm finally doing what is my most requested cell phone tutorial, and that is how to shoot cinematic video with your cell phone.
I'm going to use the drift method. Freaking incredible. Round F16 for that to get that sunburst.
Alright, so I've got 7 tips for you guys on how to help you get the most out of your phone and get that cinematic looking footage. Alright, so the first tip is going to be in your settings. In order to get that cinematic footage, you want to be shooting in 24p. And it doesn't matter if you're shooting in 1080 or in 4K or 2K or whatever. What matters is your frame rate. And 24p is standard Hollywood frame rate. It's what we've grown up with the last 100 years, what we're used to. And it's what gives that smooth cinematic footage. So that's the most important thing. Make sure your settings are in 24p. So if you haven't seen it already, I did a video on introducing you to the camera settings in the Note 8, the Samsung Note 8. So you can check that out here, and that I go over how to get that into 24p and all that stuff if you have a Samsung. If not, just make sure it's in 24p. All right, so tip number 2, this one is seriously important. This is shutter speed. And in Hollywood and filmmaking and all that stuff, we use what's called the 180 rule. And that is that your shutter speed needs to be twice your frame rate. So if you're shooting in 24 frames per second, you need about 1/48th of a shutter speed. And your phones can't do that, but they can do 1/50th. So that's roughly. And if you're shooting at 30p, then you need a shutter speed of 1/60th of a second. Now, the problem with cell phones is that their apertures are all wide open. So this is like an f1.8 or something, and they're all super wide open. So if you try to shoot at 50th of a second outside in the sun with f1.8, it's just going to be complete white. So what you need is you need one of these, and these are just little phone filters. I have a link in the description for them. They're like 10 bucks or anywhere between 10 and 20 bucks. And this is an ND filter. This is a 10-stop ND filter. So it'll just clip on here like this, and then bam. Now you're able to shoot with your 50th of a second, and you can get the pack that I listed down below, which is a 3-pack, which has a 2, 4, or an 8. Or this one, which is separate, which is a 10-stop. So between those, you should have you should be able to get the necessary exposure, but that's really important. So that's your shutter speed, and that's how you get it when you're out here in broad daylight like this with the use of a filter. All right, so the next thing that you need to do in your settings is picture profile. If you can do this, some phones can't do it, but a lot of the newer Samsungs, the newer LGs, they can, and the new Pixels, I'm pretty sure the Pixels. Anyways, if you have a phone that can do manual, then you can change your color profiles, and it's really helpful to shoot in a flatter profile if you know you're going to be editing in post. So what I do is I change mine and I drop the contrast, I drop the saturation a little bit, and that gives me a flatter, more neutral profile. Now, on a little side note, the S8 and the Note 8 can only shoot in flatter profile, in a custom profile in 1080p. So keep that in mind. If you want to shoot in 4K, you can't do that just yet on the Samsung phones. But if you have another phone that can, then go ahead and set a flatter profile if you know you're going to be editing. The next tip, and this one is also super important, motion. So the actual act of filming, get off the tripod if at all possible. It's important to think about your shots and think about the movement that you're putting in there. And by movement, I mean if you're going to be doing a sliding shot, a revealing shot, if you're going to be doing a panning shot or tilting shot, or if you're going to be actually following, all of that is movement. Movement is very powerful in cinema. It helps tell your story, and most importantly, it keeps your audience visually engaged. If you just have a bunch of static tripod shots, that is not very cinematic. So there's a couple of different ways to get the movement. There are things that are expensive like sliders and all that crap, but you don't necessarily need them, especially with a smartphone if you have good stabilization. You can either do it handheld and just try to be nice and smooth like that, and the stabilization in most of these phones does a pretty good job, especially the newer ones. But there are also a few things that you can get if you want to throw a little tripod on here and use that as a makeshift gimbal. You can also get little gimbals that are, you know, between 100 and 200 bucks for the cell phone. Those really, really help. Any of those things really help for getting that smooth, steady movement that you want. All right, so the last few things are gonna be in post on the computer. So let's go back to the studio and jump in there into Premiere, and we'll go from there. Whew. All right, so we're back in the studio. I got all the footage I need to get. One thing I wanted to mention that I should have mentioned while I was out there is another thing concerning settings, which is the next thing on our list, which is speed. And by speed, mostly I'm talking about slow motion. So a great way to make anything look cinematic these days is by adding some slow motion or filming in slow motion and then slowing it down in the computer, so in post. So we're gonna go over that in just a minute. Okay, so after speed, the next stuff we're gonna look at is all in post-production. And this stuff is more general guidelines for making your footage look cinematic no matter what you're shooting on. But even if you're shooting on a smartphone like we are now, it's still something that you need to do, or at least need to consider if you really want to go that extra mile for that full cinematic looking footage. So the first things we're going to want to do in post is to be to color correct and then color grade. Now there is a difference between color correcting and color grading. Color correcting is adjusting your exposure, your white balance, making sure it's set properly, adjusting the contrast, dropping those highlights, boosting those shadows. Those kind of things are color correction. So we're correcting everything to get to a good starting point. And then once we have everything color corrected the way that we want, then we start color grading. Now color grading is very important to cinematic looking footage. Color grading has everything to do with psychology and the mood and the emotion that you want to try to convey when you're telling your story. So it's another way to very subtly influence your audience by adding that emotion in, and color grading is how we're going to do that. So when you see things like this that are the blue and the teal, I mean the blues and the oranges, those are very popular complementary colors that are used to tell the story. But if you have something that you want to be a little darker, maybe it's a little edgier or a little scarier or whatever, then you can change it and make it, you know, more bluish or whatever you need to do to convey that emotion that you're trying to show. If you want something lighter and upbeat, then you want more sunshine, more warmth, more brightness, that kind of thing. So these are all things that go into color grading, and I'm not going to go into super detail about this stuff because, as you can tell, it can get super complicated, and that's a whole other tutorial that I will be doing. But that's going to be much more lengthy and much more involved. So for now, I'm just going to show you a few of the basic things, how you can easily color correct with and color grade with what's given to you in programs like Premiere. And the last thing that I want to go over, there's two more things that I want to go over, and that's if you really want to add that extra cinematic look and go that extra mile, then we're going to add some black bars, and those are in cinematography, those are called anamorphic bars, because Hollywood, they typically use anamorphic lenses, which are lenses that are built for a different ratio. So it's more like, instead of 16:9, it's more like 21:9. And we're going to mimic that. So adding these black bars in post is a great way to do that. And as soon as people see those black bars, they register in their brains, oh, this is cinematic. It's just something that we've grown accustomed to and we've been trained to recognize. We see those black bars, cinematic, first thing that comes to mind. So we're already going to be put in a mood as soon as we see those bars. And they're very easy to add. So I'm going to show you how to do that in Premiere. The next thing that I want to go over, the last thing, and again, this is more of a general thing, it doesn't really have too much to do with smartphone, but again, if you want that extra mile, then you need to take into consideration music and sound. Audio is super important to everything, no matter what you do. If you're doing video, audio is just as important, if not more important sometimes, than the actual video itself. Our eyes are much more forgiving than our ears. So it's much easier for us to watch something bad if it sounds good. But if it doesn't sound good, it could be shot by the best cinematographer in the world. And if it has bad audio, we're gonna turn it off much faster. So audio is super important. Things like picking the right type of music and things like adding in those sound effects so that everything sounds natural. The best audio is the type that you don't really recognize. So if you don't know that it's bad, that means that it's good because everything is flowing like normal. So adding in the footsteps and the Foley sounds, or the sound of a door shutting, or whatever you need to do to get the right sounds, adding in some atmosphere like some birds chirping in this forest scene, a little bit of wind blowing. You know, you add these types of elements in to give a full audio experience, to add that to your visual impact, because cinematography is much more than just seeing, it's experiencing, and we experience through our ears just as much as our eyes. So that was kind of a little bonus tip. Now let's go ahead and jump into the computer and I will show you what I'm talking about with these things and walk you through a little bit on how I'm doing everything in Premiere.
Alright, so let's see if I can do this quickly enough to not make it run too long, but long enough so that you get the idea of what I'm doing. So I brought all the footage in here that I shot that I want to edit. This is all of the cinematic B-roll type stuff. So the first thing I need to do is color correct it. Now I know that all of these were shot in similar lighting conditions in the same place, so I know they're all going to be kind of the same. So rather than do each one individually, what I'm going to do is go down here and go to make a new adjustment layer. And I'm going to drag it across all of them. Now instead of correcting each one of these, I'm going to go ahead and correct the adjustment layer. So I'm going to go up here in Lumetri if you're using Adobe Premiere Pro CC. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to fix things. Like I want to warm this up just a little bit. I want to drop the highlights just a little bit. I definitely want to increase the contrast because like I said, I shot it really flat. And then I want to boost the shadows just a little bit. Increase the saturation about to 130. It's by default at 100, so I increased it about by 30%. So the reason why you're not seeing anything is because I had that turned off on accident. So that's the before and the after. And then you can go in here and refine that just a little bit. I still think it needs to be, I'm going to bring those blacks down a little bit. So again, this is doing it over all of the clips. So you can see a couple of them might still need a little bit of slightly different tweaking, and if you do that, you can select the actual clip. So I'm going to go in here and readjust that stuff. Alright, so once I'm happy with all of my clips, now that they are color corrected, now we're going to go do a little bit of color grading. And for this, I'm going to use the same layer. You could use a different layer, and you can stack them, but I'm going to use the same layer, and I'm going to go over here and go into Creative. So when I bring up Creative, this is going to give me the option to do my color wheels and just more stuff. So there's curves, and here's the standard color wheels. But for this, I'm going to use what's called a lookup table. It's a LUT for short, and they're very common. Adobe comes with a lot of these. See, these are all different lookup tables, and they mimic different film styles or different movie styles or different feels. So you can put that on there, and then you can see the difference that it makes. This is mimicking the old Fuji Eterna 250D. And this is by Adobe, so this is free if you have Lumetri, so it's very powerful. Then you can do things like add faded film to give it a little softer of a look, so I'm going to go ahead and add about 15%. And since I know that I decreased the sharpening in my phone, I'm going to go ahead and add a little of it back in post, so I'm going to give it about 15. So for this though, I'm going to use a slightly different look. You can also buy external LUTs from other people, or you can make your own. One that I really like, a package that I really like, is by Film Riot, and I'll put the links in the description for them below. I picked them because I really love Ryan Conley and everything he does. I'm not associated with them in any way, but I love their LUTs, and I added a package, and you can see here all of these. They basically went through and recreated LUTs for all of these movie types, and they've mixed in. All of these are Adobe's, but they're mixed in. So if you see all of this stuff, Star Wars, Suicide Squad, all the Lord of the Rings, so a lot of different types of movies with a lot of different feels to them, and I really like that offering. So other people like Peter McKinnon, if you watch his stuff, he sells his own LUTs. A lot of people sell their own LUTs, and it's just it's just personal preference. So I went with Film Riot's. I think it was like 15 or 20 bucks for this whole package. I installed them, and I'm going to go ahead and go with this Guardians of the Galaxy one because, like I mentioned before, it has that real good sense of the blues and orange that are very popular. So I'm going to use that. I'm going to drop the intensity down about halfway so it's not so strong, but you can still see the difference in, especially like in her jacket and in the highlights. It's giving those highlights a bit of warmth, and it's giving those shadows a bit of the blue feel. And that's the kind of feel I want here. It's kind of a normal, happy feeling, and that's what I want to showcase with this. So that's kind of just a little bit of the color grading style. I'm going to also go ahead and just add just a very small amount of a vignette, just to kind of make that stand out a little bit more and push your eyes a little bit more towards the center there. So those are all the little things with the color grading. See, now though, you need to go back, and this is when you do the color correcting again, because I've added the look that I want, but on some of these it's changing the look a little bit too much. So I need to warm this back up just a pinch, and I need maybe a little bit more contrast. And the same here. This is feeling a little bit cool to me still. So I'm just going to increase the warmth just a little bit and bump up the contrast on just that individual clip. So once we have all of that good to go, I've already added the music, so that's the next part of it. Well, wait, we'll come back to that. So the next thing we need to do is add the bars. So again, I'm just going to, you can go ahead and grab you another adjustment layer if you don't want it to mess with anything else. So you can go up here, go into Effects, and type in Crop, and then come down here. It's the one under the Transform. There might be different ones, but it's the one under the Transform. So we're going to drag that over, and then we're going to come over here to our Crop Effects Controls, and we want the top and the bottom. So to mimic that anamorphic look, we want to go to somewhere between 13 and 16% on each side. So I'm going to do 13% on the top and 13% on the bottom. And bam, there you have it. There's our crop, and immediately you just get that cinematic feel. Your eyes relate to it. You understand, oh, this is cinematic. So the one thing about the crop is, since we didn't shoot for that or with a crop lens, some of these clips may be a little off like this. So I don't want to chop off that much of her. So I'm going to go to the clip. I'm going to go to the motion, which is the first thing up here, and I'm just going to drag it down a little bit to right there. So that'll show more of what I want to be seen. So if I take away that crop though, you'll see that it's chopped off because I decentered it. But we want the crop back on, so I think that's the only clip that I needed or wanted to do that with. Alright, so there is the cinematic stuff in the post, and then we'll come back over here, and I've already added the sound effects and the music. Alright, so that was it. I don't want to go over too much else because it's already super long and that's a lot to cover, but those are the basic principles of cinematography, whether you're shooting on a phone or not. And it's really easy for people to think that they can't do this type of stuff on the phone, but clearly you can. It just requires a little bit of effort. So like I said, I'm going to be doing more stuff like this in the future that's going to focus solely on things like editing and getting those shots and the audio and all of that stuff, those are going to be separate. So I'm going to wrap this tutorial up, and if you like this kind of stuff and you want to see more of it, definitely make sure you subscribe to the channel. I've got new tutorials every Tuesday, and make sure if you have any questions about any of this stuff regarding the cell phones or the settings or the tips or any of that, leave those questions in the comments below and I will definitely answer them. Make sure you hit that like button and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.